Hello there, friends. Welcome to BJJ Meditations. This is BJJ Meditations episode number 88. I'm your host, Joe Hannan. Joe from Jersey. It's late in the day on Wednesday. Usually I record my podcasts, ideally prior to Wednesday, but today I had thought I would release an episode with Jake Luigi and Josh Liu in which we discuss the intersection of hunting and Jiu Jitsu in greater detail, and also preview project that we're working on together. But yesterday was the presidential election, and I feel like talking about anything else other than that is probably irrelevant. And before you stop listening to this podcast, let me assure you that I'm not here to say anything particularly incendiary. I'm just sitting here trying to make sense of this bizarre but not unexpected outcome, at least in my case, and also to provide some context relative to the practice of jiu-jitsu and how I think it helps me understand the situation, perhaps how it might help you understand it as well. So that's why I'm here. I'm here to talk about the thing I probably shouldn't talk about. This is the ultimate third rail. And here we go. I'm going for the third rail. Donald Trump. Never been a fan. I have not voted for him. I have voted for other Republicans in the past, but certainly not Donald Trump. To me, and I voted for Democrats in the past too. I'm one who has consistently split tickets over the years, and has supported both parties kind of like with much chagrin. There really isn't. I'm kind of an apolitical being. I wasn't always that way, but ultimately I've grown to appreciate the fact that politics as currently constructed has outlived its usefulness, and I'm not really interested in playing that game. I'm more of a devotee to game B, which is helping people make sense of the increasing complexity of the world so that they can make better decisions. And really, I think maybe that's what this podcast is all about. It's secondarily about jiu-jitsu. But anyway, Trump, not a fan. I think my biggest objection with Donald Trump has been an opinion I voiced last night, really two large objections. The first is that to understand Donald Trump, I think you only have to understand that it's almost always about him. It's really, and I think even supporters sort of among you may even agree with that. I know one of the people I was talking to about this, I think they're conservative, and they agreed with me. It's about Donald Trump, and it's about Donald Trump. I think it's exemplified by behaviors, crimes committed, a lack of acknowledgement of responsibility for things that have come to pass in recent history, like the events of January 6th, that the man is just morally and ethically bankrupt. There's just, in my view, there's no way of getting around that. And I hold this view so strongly that this morning I explained to my son, who's 3, that, Mom and Dad didn't vote for Donald Trump, buddy. I want you to understand this. And the significance of my explaining this to you will become apparent maybe as the years come. I hope they don't. I really hope that I'm wrong about this. But I want to talk about this in as measured and as sort of sober of the tone as I can muster, because I certainly feel a very strong emotional reaction to the news of this morning, but not as strong as the last time. I mean, the first time Donald Trump was elected, I remember reading Abraham Lincoln's Lyceum address and just thinking like, wow, Lincoln was right. If destruction be our lot, we ourselves must be our authors and its authors and finishers. And was this it? Well, it wasn't. Thankfully, we survived 4 years of Donald Trump here in the United States. And we're going to see if we survive another 4. I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. I can't tell you what's going to happen. But I feel certainly more emotionally detached from this outcome than I did the previous outcome. And that's really what I want to talk about today with you. And, we live in increasingly volatile times. I mean, it's interesting to think, if you asked me 4 years ago, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, like, would I think that Joe Rogan would bring Donald Trump on his podcast, I'd probably say no. But situations have come to pass where something like that is even now within the realm of possibility. I even look at like the intellectual evolution, some might call it de-evolution, of a journalist like Matt Taibbi. But the thing I'm trying to make with these two examples is that there's an evolving complexity to the state of play right now that these two individuals, who I've selected for no apparent reason other than the fact that they just came to the top of my brain, represent. And we're living in this time of intellectual complexity and increasing volatility. And I'm starting to think that the most courageous thing a person can do is to be unmoved by it. And I think this is inherent to the practice of grappling. Like, we are all, by dint of our training, conditioning ourselves to be present and to be able to operate in times of volatility. And yeah, I think that the most courageous thing any of us can do right now is to be unmoved. That doesn't mean unopinionated. That doesn't mean not having a perspective. But when everything is shifting, there's a commitment and a practice that's required to staying steady. And that's what I'm here to talk about. Recently, at PBJJ, my school, Princeton BJJ, I held a book club, first of our book club discussions of the book Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. And this was quite intentionally selected on my part. If you missed the discussion, it was an episode of this podcast, so you can go back and kind of hear what people took out of that. But I see books like Meditations as operating manuals for the complexity that I'm describing. And when I woke up this morning after an intense night of training and decent sleep, okay sleep for a night of training, but I did not stay up and watch the election results. And I didn't for the very reason that Marcus Aurelius describes in this quote. He says, quote, "I do my duty. Other things do not trouble me, for they are either things without life or things without reason or things that have rambled and do not know the way." I think that's highly applicable to our current circumstances. Last night at the school, Monday night at the school, Enoch from Jiu Jitsu World League, is sort of like our local Jiu Jitsu World League representative, came through just to kind of like make more connections and promote JJWL, obviously. He does a great job at that. And we talked a bit about how Jiu-Jitsu is like this great equalizer. And this is the cliche, the trope that I'm sure you've all heard a million times before, like, oh, Jiu-Jitsu mat is one of the only places where you'll find liberals and conservatives and cops and criminals and hippies and students. And it's this great melting pot where everybody is forced to interact. And, there's truth to that cliche. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a cliche. Like, those two things are sort of inseparable, right? And I've experienced this myself. I remember once I dropped in this neighborhood school in Georgia, close to my in-laws' house, just to get some training in. And the professor must have said that, we've got a guy coming from New Jersey in tonight. And as I was walking in, there was discussion of liberal Northerners who don't know anything about guns and that sort of thing being held at a volume that clearly was intended to like get a rise out of me or get my attention. So after the class had ended, I was talking to them about, oh yeah, like I know I'm a liberal Northerner from New Jersey, but I grew up hunting. There were certainly guns in my house. I believe in responsible gun ownership, that sort of thing. And it was as if I could see sort of like this veil of understanding, or the wool kind of being pulled back from over their eyes. Like, oh, there's nuance to this. Like, this, me and this guy who I had an idea of, we actually have more in common than I realized. And I see this on a daily basis in Princeton too. Like, even in a place like Princeton, which is like pretty monolithic politically, we still have students of all political persuasions and walks of life who train with us. And, we all function, we all get along. And this is not, what I'm saying here is not meant to be some Pollyanna-ish. Like, we all just need to get along, and we all need to coexist. And, like the coexist bumper sticker is, I find it very obnoxious, because it's more than simply coexistence that's required. It's shared understanding that's required. And that's what I felt in that conversation with those guys at that school in Georgia. And that's what I feel every single time we have a successful class at the school, when people from all walks of life can get together and train and share an experience. And I think the reason why this works is not this ridiculous Pollyanna-ish of like mentality of like, let's all get along. It's because jiu-jitsu moves us out of this prepositional frame of knowledge to more of a participatory framework of knowing. We create and share an experience together. And that's something that most Americans do not do. Most Americans, the America that led to the election of Donald Trump, is a product, I feel, of people living in their echo chambers, not interacting with the other side of the aisle, hearing the loudest voices, which are not necessarily the most representative voices. And it creates this phenomenon where the center starts to drift. Things become volatile. And really, the most courageous thing to do in that situation is to be unmoved, to stand by your principles. And that doesn't mean we don't disagree. It doesn't mean we don't stand up for what is right. I think, to go back to Marcus Aurelius' quotation here of, these things do not trouble me, for they are either things without life or things without reason or things that have rambled and do not know the way. I think that many in the world right now are without reason, at least in this context. I don't think it's their fault. Many of them, I don't think it's their fault. I think that the world just becomes more complex by the minute. I think that our economy has evolved in such a way where people are in a lot of pain right now, and they've been forced to adapt and change their lifestyle in ways that haven't been beneficial for them. I think that many people look at their representation in Washington or even in their state legislatures, and they don't see or feel any sort of immediate connection. They don't feel like they're being seen or heard. So yeah, I think there are people without reason. And I think that some of them, certainly, this is an apolitical statement, I think some people are without reason by choice, and then some sort of are victims of circumstance. And I think there are people too, as Marcus Aurelius has suggested, that have rambled and do not know the way. It's very easy to ramble in this information climate. It's very easy to get drawn into the vacuum of the social media landscape, for example. Last night, I said to one of our black belts, really wise guy named Pete, I said to him, yeah, I keep having a good time, and then I remember that it's election day, and I get sucked right out of it. And he was like, this is the only sane place to be, is to be here training. And yeah, I said, yeah, I think that's it. I think and I didn't say this, I thought it, but yeah, here's the only sane thing to do right now is engage in participatory ways of knowing, and to love our families, and to just be more connected and less divided. And I know that sounds kind of rote and sort of pathetic, but really, like, that's what this all boils down to, is striving for shared understanding and striving for connection that does not compromise on what is morally incorrect or improper. So yeah, it doesn't mean we stop advocating for what is right, but any grappler knows that tactics matter. Any warrior knows that tactics matter. And we also have all had the experience of being in a combative situation where you select the wrong tactics and things escalate, and you take what was a winnable or a compromise scenario and it gets out of hand. And I think in large ways, like, that's what's happened right now in the American political landscape. I think in their hearts of hearts, most Americans, regardless of their political affiliations, did not and do not want the tone and tenor of the political discourse to be what it is. And the discourse is what, in my opinion, has driven the outcomes. And it's not lost on me that these kinds of discussions and these kind of things just don't happen in jiu-jitsu schools mostly, because people understand that it's not an idea that they're fighting against. It's not like a nameless entity. It's another person. You're grappling with another human, regardless. They're either on the other side of the mat or they're on the other side of the keyboard. And I think that people who do the work of this participatory way of knowing are less inclined to take things into the prepositional direction where things spiral out of control. So You may not think that training jiu-jitsu is sort of the reparative, restorative work that is inherent to the path ahead for this country, if there is one, but I think it is, and I think it's essential. But yeah, this is how we have ended up where we are, folks, from where I sit. It's this escalation. It's a rambling. It's a mutual lack of understanding. And, I want to be clear that I find Trump morally reprehensible. I want to be clear that I imagine, just as supporters of any politician throughout any time of history, I imagine that there are people among the supporters of both candidates that are morally reprehensible. Generally speaking, I find that political people tend to be very willing to sacrifice their moral and their ethical obligations in favor of getting the outcomes that they want. However, that does not mean that there is not a path forward here. I think that the majority of people are open to reason. And maybe that's just the optimism that continues to get me out of bed this morning, and that, initially thought that having a child would be a good and a sane venture. And I still do. I still am very pro future. I think we need to build the future that we want. And I think that right now, that future starts with anyone listening to this podcast who's made it this far along and hasn't unsubscribed or started penning a nasty note to me, either for being too conciliatory or too harsh or whatever. I think that change and that progress starts in your heart and your soul. And it starts with taking a deep breath and realizing that we're still here, realizing that there are things that have rambled, there are people that have rambled, realizing that there are things and people without reason, and realizing that we have the control to enhance how we make sense of these things. We have the control and the ability to bridge the gap. We have the control and the ability to grapple literally, physically, metaphorically with these principles and try to bring ourselves back together into something that is cohesive and functional. And I don't know about you folks, but that is the work thematically and principally that I will be up to for at least the next 4 years. So I want to thank you very much for listening. Took last week off, had a lot going on, had a lot I kind of needed to process, and I was looking forward to just clicking publish on an episode that's already done, but I felt like this was sort of my moral and ethical obligation to record this and share it, and I will share it with much trepidation and fear. But this is, I feel strongly compelled that this is my path to take, so thank you for listening. As always, check out the book club. We're going to be doing another edition of the book. It's called The Book by Alan Watts. It'll be our next read on the taboo of knowing who you are. I believe that's going to be on November 26th. Let me double check the date. Sorry, that's Sunday, November 24th. Time will be 7:30 to 8:30. There will be a Zoom option for those who choose to attend via Zoom. Anyone in the area is, of course, welcome to come to Princeton BJJ. The only participation requirement is to read the book in advance. There's a registration link in the show notes. If you're interested, please come and join us. The other thing I announced in a previous episode, I got my CPT certification. If you're interested in strength and conditioning coaching specific to jiu-jitsu, hit me up. You can reach me at bjjmeditations@gmail.com for that. This is all informed by my jiu-jitsu practice of 9 years now, working with excellent trainers and also seeing what's lacking sort of in the strength and conditioning space specific for jiu-jitsu, trying to sort of fill that unmet need. Hit me up if that interests you. I'd like to say it would be like strength and conditioning plus. We can take more of an optimal performance bend and approach to the work stemming from my work outside of the jiu-jitsu school. But other than that, t-shirts on the way, merch, they're ready to go. They're sitting in my house. I just haven't built the landing page for those to be purchased yet. So when I get a spare minute or two, I'll put that up and announce that on social media. Great way to support the podcast in addition to coaching, if that interests you. But hey, thanks for listening, folks. Be unmoved. That's all I can say to you. Be of sound mind, be of sound judgment. Speak what you believe to be right, but be unmoved. Don't give in. Take care. We'll talk soon.